critical and is going to be a important part of most forms of scientific writing. This has to go with knowing your audience, right? So depending on who you're writing for, you may need to provide a large amount of background information to orient them on the issue. So for instance, when I'm writing a grant proposal and I know it's going to a fairly general review panel who may not have a background in entomology, who may not know relationships among organisms that I'm working on, who may not know something about this specific class of molecules, but they're very, very educated in other areas. I may need to make sure that I'm providing them a little bit of background information to bring them up to the point where now I can say, okay, here's what I want to do, and here's why it's important. Okay, so organization is a really important form for your scientific writing. Okay, after we do our introduction, we usually have materials and methods, and then results. Some people put materials and methods at the very end of the paper instead. And then our last section is the discussion, unless our materials and methods is back there. Why do we move materials and methods all the way to the end?
They could be lengthy.
Sometimes, yeah. Usually their length is not that much more than the rest of the paper. It's usually fairly comparable to other elements. Materials and methods is the part of the paper that almost no one reads, or you skim over it, right? And so it's there, and it's an important part because this is where the guts of it is. You know, this is what I did that will give you the results that I'm telling you about, right? But a lot of people will look over it, and then the people that are in that field that are really interested or perhaps maybe want to use one of those protocols, apply it a different way, will read it in a lot of detail. And you don't know how many times I have read over materials and methods and just been completely frustrated because they explain something in a way that is not clear. And maybe it's on my end, but I've shown to other people, what do you think they did here? So I can't tell if they did this or maybe they did it another way. So clarity is really critical for those points. Okay? So, this is the point where we've got a list. And I'm going to put number 1 on this list of how we make our writing better. Is experience. Now this comes in 2 main forms. Number 1, in order to be a good writer, you need to be able to draw from a body of knowledge. You need to be able to draw from some experience that you've had. The very best way to do that is to read. So you need to read the scientific literature. If you're writing a grant proposal, you should be looking at grant proposals. Sometimes those are a little bit difficult to come by, so you may want to talk to your advisor, you may want to talk to other students, right? And so if you are new at a form of writing or feel a little bit uncomfortable about what you're doing, the best thing to do is look at other people's writing and then mimic it. Now, notice I don't say copy, we don't plagiarize, but look at what they're doing. Look at what works. And then do the same thing. That's how we all get started in any sort of skill discipline. We look at what other people are doing and we try it out ourselves. We try to do the same thing. So particularly if you can find good examples that you have thought were successful and useful, use those to start with. And then finally, practice. So any piece of writing that is important, you need to go through several iterations. And not only yourself, in fact, least importantly in this process is yourself. You need to get other people to look at it. For some parts of feedback, you can have anyone look at it. You can have a family member or friend read it and look at it and say, okay, what parts of this did you like and you didn't like? So that can help you do things like, okay, is it relatable? Is it readable? Those sorts of things can be answered very clearly by anyone, any competent reader. But sometimes you may want somebody who's a little bit more specialized. Give it to another student who is in your lab. Give it to an advisor, somebody who has a little bit more experience, and say, okay, what are the elements of this that work and what don't? And that not only makes your writing better, but it also increases your skill as a writer. And this is the most important thing. Practice, practice, practice. Rewrite it, do it again. And especially if you have an important piece, if you're writing a grant proposal, if you're writing a personal narrative or some sort of application to a graduate school or post-baccalaureate program, you need to make sure that you've gone through several iterations of that. And I would even recommend, even if you've got a very good person who's looking at it, probably 2 or even 3 reviewers are better than a single one, no matter how good that single reviewer is, because they're going to be somewhat biased and maybe not be able to see the things that other people can see. Okay, so those are my 3 best suggestions for making your writing better, and by far the most important one is practice. Okay, so let's look at these 2 things that we're going to talk about specifically, and then I'm going to open it up to questions if you have other forms of scientific writing or other questions in regards to things we've looked at here. There are 3 main elements in a grant proposal, and many of these you're going to see are going to accomplish these purposes that we've talked about for writing in general and more specifically for scientific writing. So the very first one is you need to have a very clear outline that is going to orient your audience to where they need to be to understand your research. What types of things? And again, it's important for you to know your audience. So if I'm writing a grant proposal for a, say for instance, an internal grant, there's some funds available here at UTRGV. I'm going to have a very different form of my background information than if I was writing to an NSF panel who's going to be much more versed in many of the technical aspects. So that background material is going to be able to provide any reader in the audience with enough information to at least begin to understand why you are proposing the work and why it's important. The second step, this is proposed research. And I think here, particularly these things we talked about, clarity and objectivity. So in your proposed research, you're often talking about, this is what we've done so far, some of the preliminary data we've gathered, and this is where we want to go. And you need to be very, very specific. I find that when writing these, it can be useful to even enumerate within a paragraph. So you can break out a paragraph and make a list, or even within a paragraph you can put number 1, number 2, number 3. Here are the 3 things that we are hoping to accomplish with this research. And then finally, the last thing, and this is perhaps I think the most important. These are important and they're necessary parts of the grant, but if you can somehow communicate, this is where you're trying to get into the reader and really communicate some information to that reader, is why this is important. What sorts of information will we learn? What does that information have to do? What's the broader impact of this sort of a research? Fine if I can find out this information about this one specific group, or if you're doing a research on a specific group of chemicals. Maybe there are other elements of that research that would be applicable to other groups of chemicals. Or maybe you're working on a group of bacteria, and although it might be really useful for that bacteria, there are going to be applications far outside of that. And sometimes your reviewers will see those sorts of things where you wouldn't. I've had grants before that I gave to someone to look at, and I said, oh, this would be really useful in this aspect. This information would help provide a background for other sorts of types of research. If you are doing this, whether it's for a small internal grant or eventually as you're a grad student, you might be applying for fellowships that are competitive and require you to have a research component. Again, the most important thing you can do for these sorts of things is give them to other people who are in a position to judge and to give you feedback. This is not something that's ever taught. And again, it's kind of a little bit, I don't know if silly is the right word, but it's a little bit difficult for me to get up here and I could, provide a very long explanation with lots of fine detail about how to structure and write a grant proposal. But in the long run, the most valuable thing you're going to be able to do that is look at someone else's work, write your own, and then go through iterations with people who you trust and people who have done it before. Okay, so that's that practice part. Do it over and over and over again. I'm going to end with this one. Most applications, again, whether it's for some sort of an internship or some sort of a fellowship where you're going to be getting money to do research, or if it's just simply for an application to a school, they require that you write a personal statement. And again, I think there's some important elements. In this type of writing, you have a little bit more opportunity to be creative, to look at what are the rules, what's generally done, and perhaps move outside of that a little bit to be able to communicate some of your own personal traits and some things that are going to be beneficial for you. First and foremost, personal statement is a narrative. You want to be able to tell a story. At the same time, you want to stay away from cliche. So I would say I would stay away from statements such as ever since I was a small child. That's how that's how a lot of these start. And again, it's so done, it works for a reason. But perhaps think of a creative way to do that. How do you convey that same information? If you've always wanted to be a biologist, marine biologist, or you've always wanted to be a doctor, whatever it may be, that's great. But there are ways that you can convey that and try to think really honestly. And I think for your strengths, you really need to sit back and take an honest assessment of this is what I bring to the table. This is what's going to set me apart from other students. And sometimes, again, that can be difficult, but to do self-assessment like this, but can come through clearly in your writing. And if you can make a case for yourself, even though you may not have as many accolades and as much background, as strong a proposal or as strong an application as another student has, if you can grab someone's attention and say, this is my strength, this is what I'm different, this is what I would bring to the program that and someone else may not. And the thing is, everybody has this, different combinations of different things. And so if you can do an honest assessment and have someone look at that and go over it and say, yeah, I agree with it, that is one of your strengths. You may want to reassess this one because sometimes we're not the best at saying, this is what I'm good at. That kind of iterative process where you're going over things, this is what I bring to it, here's someone else's input, can really make a strong proposal. Again, very best thing I can recommend for you to do on this is to say, here's what other people have done. Go to your advisor and say, hey, have you ever had to write a personal statement? The answer is, yeah, they've probably written many, and say, well, do you have one that is recent that I can look at? What elements might you think that I should include for this sort of an application? Maybe you don't have another one to look at that's specific for that application. Rely on the community around you. Other students might be a great source also. So at this point, I told you this was about half an hour, just a little bit longer than that. But what I'd like to do, and it's a little bit, again, a smaller audience, but I'd like, if you have questions, things that you are anticipating writing, and maybe some things that you're writing now that are, if you have questions that are for a specific genre, you have myself, you have other students who may have some experience here. Dr. Ampersand in the back also has experience in these forms of scientific writing, so it's a good opportunity to ask questions. And many faculty members also do this, but I have an open door policy, particularly if you make an appointment or come during my office hours. I'll answer any question you want, right? I may not be the best source, and I might send you to someone else and say, oh, I don't know really a lot about this, go to this person. But if you want to do it outside of this venue here, I'm happy to do that also. But now you have an opportunity to ask questions, to talk about any aspects of this writing that you'd like.
Can I make an observation?
Yeah.
As a scientist, in my training as a student, I always thought the scientists were supposed to be the most objective of people who just used evidence, right? We're supposed to be cut and dry, no frills, that kind of
Right.
thing. But in our writing, about the only place that you get to do that is in papers. If you're looking at personal statements and grants,
Right.
there is an element of advertisement that you're
Exactly.
doing in there.
Salesmanship. So
Right.
my very first time I did this, I was writing a proposal for a graduate grant that was going to provide basically a stipend for me to do research and paying a small salary to do my research. I didn't get it, by the way. But it was an incredibly valuable experience. But the very first thing I gave it to my advisor, and he went over it and came back, and it was probably more red than black at that point. He'd done our track changes on Microsoft Word. And the very first thing he said to me, handed it to me and said, this is not really very good. You need to make it sexy. And at first I'm like, what? He says, no, not like that, right? You don't need to put in a sex scene or something like that. But what you need to do is say, why in the heck should I care about this? And that's what you're talking about. When you write a personal statement, when you write a grant proposal, basically you're trying to convince people to care about usually some little small domain of your research and think, well, why is this cool? And there are some really powerful ways to do that in writing. It's a little different than getting in front of an audience and talking about it. So verbal communication is very, very different from writing. And I've seen people that are incredibly good at written communication, but completely awful at verbal communication. And vice versa, I guess, to some extent. Although I think that seems to happen a little less frequently. Communication skills, some of it is kind of cross-fitting.
Yeah, but that was one of the things when I started writing grant proposals here.
Yeah.
It was the cut and dry type stuff, and then I realized, oh my gosh, this is not getting anywhere. And as I started looking at people's suggestions for grant writing, it eventually became apparent that essentially you're doing a sales job.
Yeah.
And you have to do it in such a way that it does not come across as that. Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance to strike, right? And
Right.
and I think despite, you're saying you want to be objective, I think at the same time so there are ways to present things, and in order to present things that are going to make them sexy, again, for lack of a better word, that are going to make them look at, wow, this is really neat, this is really cool, but still making sure that you are getting all of these kind of very basic things done.
Right.
And at some point, there does become a level of proficiency that's needed. And so that's going back to the practice to writing over and over again. So great writers are those who know all of the rules and know when to break them, when to bend them, when to be creative, because that's what kind of sets you apart from other people. And so my recommendation is first kind of learn the basic form, write the basic form, and then once you understand it, maybe you can start to do things, and this is where the creativity comes in. You can start to do things in a way that's not kind of cut and paste by the book sort of writing, and that will be what sets you apart. But in order to do that, you have to know when you're doing it. So if you're making all sorts of mistakes and doing things kind of in an unusual way and you have no idea that that's what's going on, that's a really bad sign. But if you get to a certain level where, okay, now I feel comfortable, maybe most grant proposals are not going to have something like this. Most grant proposals are not going to do it in this way. As long as you can know that you're kind of breaking the rules and there's a good reason why you're doing it and you're accomplishing the purpose to do that, then you can do that sort of thing. In some ways, I look at, and my instructor gave me this, so I kind of stole it from him, but in some ways I often look across my list, or at least enumeration in paragraphs, as a way to do that. I often, in a grant proposal, will write a sentence, kind of a summary sentence at the beginning that will say, we are going to, number one, do this, number two, and usually you don't see sentences with numbers in them, I just put them right in the middle of the sentence. But I think that